Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast.
If you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics show that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens.
Vice presidential candidates J.D. Vance and Tim Walz traded barbs politely for over an hour in the CBS debate in New York City last night. But there was a different energy to what we saw in the presidential debate.
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one.
For one, both said multiple times they actually agreed with each other. On top of that, there was a moment on stage afterwards where the two candidates and their spouses shared a short, and by all accounts, cordial chat. For more on this debate, the candidates, and what the last month of this race will hold, I'm joined by John Fund, columnist with the National Review, and Democratic strategist Craig Varoga. Good morning to you both.
Hey, good morning.
Thank you.
John, the phrase is that these men are a heartbeat away from the Oval Office. What did J.D. Vance need to do last night, and did he do it?
Well, he proved that you can have a Midwest nice debate, and he also humanized himself. He introduced people to his blue-collar background and his hard-scrabble biography, and he showed that as an Ivy League graduate, he also knows how to conduct a smooth and impressive presentation.
Craig, there were no childless cat lady comments from J.D. Vance. What did you make of his performance?
I think stylistically he did a pretty good job throughout most of the debate. I think, however, from a Democratic point of view, the final exchange about January 6th is the thing that, the Democrats are going to remember and use because he did refuse to answer the question. But I think up until then, stylistically, he, as John said, he did a pretty good job.
What about Tim Walz? What did Tim Walz need to do, Craig, and did he do it?
Well, I think both of them, the mandate for any vice presidential candidate in the debate is to do no harm. We went into that into that debate with Harris Walz ahead by 2 or 2.5 points, but basically tied in all the 7 battleground states. I think that's where we come out of this thing. I don't think that this thing changed things one way or another. But if you're the Harris campaign or, Kamala Harris, I think you have to be pleased with how Walz did on January 6th on abortion, on healthcare, and on guns.
John, what do you make of Tim Walz's performance?
Well, Kamala Harris's first executive decision was to decide who she would pick as her vice presidential running mate. And in the end, she had 2 choices. She had Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, and she had Tim Walz. Shapiro went in and said, I want to be your partner. I want to know how you want to use the vice president to help you. I want to be a full participant of the administration. And Tim Walz came in and said, basically, I'll be your lapdog. And Kamala Harris picked the lapdog. Tim Walz's performance, I think, convinced Democrats that, yes, luckily, vice presidential debates normally don't matter. But if they did matter, Tim Walz put in a very halting, nervous performance. And frankly, the only thing that saved him was that the only fact checks during the debate were of Vance, the Republican. Walz, the Democrat, even though he had some real whoppers in his presentation, didn't get a single fact check.
Why did Donald Trump, if you're talking about who picked who, remind us what Donald Trump was trying to achieve when he picked J.D. Vance as his running mate.
I think he wanted a mini-me. I think he wanted someone who would take on the MAGA mantle after he leaves office, if he's elected in 4 years, and pursue his policies, his strategies, and his approach to the Republican Party. And in Vance, he certainly got that. Each candidate got what they wanted when they picked their vice president.
And 2 parts on that. One is there is an observation being made this morning that in some ways J.D. Vance made the arguments that Republicans were hoping that Donald Trump would make in the presidential debate a few weeks ago, that this was Trumpism in a more palatable form. Do you buy that?
I think it's fair to say that if you walk through Donald Trump's deepest articulation, you wouldn't get your ankles wet. He is not a consistent
That's quite a turn of phrase. I'll let you continue, though.
He's not a consistent performer when it comes to debates. In fact, he prides himself on not preparing for them, and it often shows. I would say that J.D. Vance is a 40-year-old updated Super 8 version of Donald Trump.
And is he positioning himself for the 2028 race?
Win or lose, he will be in the race to run for the Republican nomination in 2028. Not the front runner, but he certainly vaulted himself into contention for that last night.
Craig, Tim Walz is seen to have potential to appeal to those center-right Republicans, perhaps, who aren't comfortable in voting for Donald Trump this time around. Do you think that performance last night was effective in bringing those voters, such as they might be, into the Harris camp?
Look, when I look at the polls this morning, or at least the one poll that I've seen, it was a 50-50 draw. I don't think that I don't think many Republicans are going to be swayed either way, by that election, by that debate. I think they're going to be pleased with how Vance did. I don't think they're going to be swayed by Walz. But among independent voters, and the one poll that I've seen this morning is that Walz, did better than Vance did. So as a Democrat, I find that encouraging. But I go back to structurally. Overwhelmingly, voters thought that Harris won the presidential debate, and afterwards, maybe the polls improved by maybe 0.2% for her overall. I don't think we're going to see much effect, based on this debate either way.
Let's talk about the issues that were discussed. Immigration, one of the top issues last night. Here's J.D. Vance.
You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country.
John Fund, that was a question in part about Donald Trump's plan for mass deportations, the largest deportation effort in U.S. history. What was J.D. Vance's job last night on the issue of immigration, do you think?
I think it was to point out that Kamala Harris was the border czar, even though she claimed she wasn't. She was put in charge of the border, and sure enough, we had a flood of people coming in. It was chaotic. She can't be blamed for all of the decisions on that, but she said nothing and did nothing, and I think that Vance prosecuted that case. He did not, I think, explain what the question actually was about, which was how in the world would you physically deport that many people? And frankly, that's logistically and physically impossible, and everybody knows that that wouldn't happen.
Craig, what did you make of that? Because Vance, in many ways, turned every question, whether it was healthcare, jobs, housing, back to immigration. Was Tim Walz effective in fending off these attacks and defending not his own record, but the record of the presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, on immigration?
I think he did a pretty good job, of undercutting some of the non-factual things that Vance did. I mean, this is such an emotionally charged topic, and there's, I think that, in the final analysis, we really need to, agree on the facts, which, right now neither party does.
Where does that leave the issue then?
Well, I think that this, as John suggested, whether it's logistics or, I think in terms of the public debate, we're not likely to face, any kind of, coherent policy, in the future. I do think that, it should be pointed out that, recently in the last year or so, the border is much more stable. The crossings are down, and the Biden administration, has done, a much better job in the last year than anybody is giving it credit, including in some cases the Biden administration itself.
Do you think? Part of this is about Vance tying Tim Walz directly to Kamala Harris and the Biden administration, and it's not so much what I would do; this is what Joe Biden has done over his time, and Kamala Harris is directly related to that. Do you think that Walz was able to distinguish his vision, but also the vision for Kamala Harris from what Joe Biden has done, or are they inextricably linked?
On immigration?
On immigration in particular, yeah.
I think that, I think that he did a pretty good job in terms of fact checking Vance and talking about the fact that, many of the things he says are inaccurate, factual. And I think that, that is, if we really want to come to terms, with one, the border, and two, immigration, we need to just, we really need to have a conversation in which we agree on facts. And I don't think that that's going to happen at any time soon. I also think that, for Democrats, this is there was an opportunity to pass a bipartisan bill in the last 12 months. And it didn't happen because Donald Trump ordered Republicans in Congress to disavow that effort because he did not want that resolved under the Biden administration. And that in terms of the border, that's, that's on Donald Trump, even though, we've seen this thing, this issue go back and forth, for years. We've been talking about it for more than 30 years and nobody has really resolved it.
John, it seems, just the last point on this, like a crazy question to ask, but on something that is as consequential as immigration and the border, do facts matter in this, or is it just about emotion?
Well, the fact of the matter is that, Donald Trump had a different approach to immigration. Joe Biden reversed that approach, and we had a chaotic situation at the border, which didn't do the asylum seekers, the migrants, the economy, or anyone any good. So, yes, the Biden administration has course corrected in the last few months. The question remains, would Kamala Harris continue that? Or would she bow to political pressure from her party's base and go back to some of the old approaches? So how the candidates have reacted to this issue does matter. And the facts, well, people don't have facts, but they do have opinions. And the opinions are we have an immigration policy that is completely broke.
Craig, you've hinted at this issue a couple of times. It came up right at the end of the debate. This is about the future of democracy, ensuring a peaceful transfer of power. Have a listen to a little bit of that part of the debate.
He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that.
John Fund, J.D. Vance would not say that Donald Trump lost in 2020, and Tim Walz went after him for that. The Democrats now say they're going to turn this into an ad. Does that worry you, J.D. Vance's non-answer?
It shows that J.D. Vance is willing to knuckle under to political reality. He knows that Donald Trump wants him to say certain things about 2020, and he said them. I think it's unfortunate, but sometimes political reality takes hold. I do think that he had an effective parry, which he said, look, both Republicans and Democrats have challenged the election results in the past, and there's certainly examples of that in 2016. Several Democrats challenged the electoral vote and accuracy, and there was, of course, the Russiagate debate. So he did say both Republicans and Democrats have messed this up. And I agree. What I think Vance did do effectively was point out that Mark Zuckerberg has said the Biden administration tried to censor Facebook, put pressure on Facebook over COVID-19 posts. And he said, look, that's not the only threat to democracy that we have is a debate over January 6th. What about the Biden administration's censorship efforts, which, by the way, the media in the United States has almost not covered at all.
But he literally wouldn't say that Donald Trump lost in 2020. And I just wonder what the impact of that is in 2024.
Well, polls show voters are worried about a lot of things: inflation, health care, a whole bunch of things. It may just pain me and it may pain others, but January 6th is not listed as one of the issues they care about.
Craig?
Look, I think that January 6th and what Donald Trump did 4 years ago is one of the darkest moments in American history. It is a disgrace. to Donald Trump. It is a disgrace to J.D. Vance that he wouldn't say that Donald Trump lost. That's not bowing to political reality. That's bowing to somebody who wants to be an authoritarian president and who didn't want to leave office 4 years ago after losing. That's bowing to somebody who sent a mob to the U.S. Capitol to kill his own vice president, if necessary, in order to overturn the election. That is disgraceful. It is a dark moment in American history. And that is not just a comment about a political tactic or about a poll.
How worried are you about history repeating itself, given how close this election is? I mean, polls are polls, but the suggestion is in the battleground states, this is within a whisker.
I think we should all be very concerned. I just don't think in the United States. I think that, it shouldn't be, this should not be a partisan issue. 20 years ago, Donald Trump would be in disgrace and in Mar-a-Lago, and nobody would be talking to him. For whatever reason, he has been, rehabilitated, at least within his own party. And if he loses again, he's again going to say he didn't lose. And J.D. Vance last night said, essentially, that if Donald Trump and he lose, he is going to go along with what Donald Trump says, which is Donald Trump again will lie and again will try to mobilize mobs to overturn the election.
John Fund, just in the last couple of minutes that we've been speaking with undecided voters, people who say that they are still waiting for more information to make up their mind. They haven't figured out whether they're going to vote at all for president, let alone who they would vote for. In the remaining weeks until this vote, what are you watching for?
I'll end on a bipartisan note. The National Association of Secretaries of State, which is half Democrat, half Republican, has issued a stern warning that our postal service in the United States is collapsing. Mail-in ballots are not being delivered. Mail-in ballots are not being returned on time. We have had primaries in America, in Utah, and in Kansas, where 2% of the mail-in ballots never made it back in time to be counted. If that is replicated in the November election, we are going to see a dispute, an uproar, and a confrontation like would make 2020 look like a Tea Party. And I fear that that's a bipartisan threat. And frankly, the real threat to this election is the bureaucracy. Can it handle the shift that we have made from in-person voting to mail-in voting? And so far, the results are not promising.
Craig Verroga, what are you worried about? I mean, you can pick up on what John said, but also just what are you watching for in the month ahead?
Well, look, let me talk about mail-in ballots and the Postal Service. The U.S. the Postmaster General of the United States was appointed by Donald Trump. He was a political appointee. He is still running the mail service in this country. What I'm worried about is the fact that because of Donald Trump's consistent record of lying about the election, that we have 35 to 40% of the country, who will believe him when he says that he won the election, even though he lost. He will say that he won the election before all the votes are counted. That, I think, is something that we can all go to the bank on. That is something that should concern all of us. I also think that, when you get down into the specific states, there are going to be, very specific things in each of the states that affect the election. For instance, in Arizona, they recently passed a law saying that proof of citizenship was required. What we're finding right now, or the early indications are, that is disproportionately affecting older Republicans among that electorate. That is, a really good example of the theory of unintended consequences. But we're going to see things in each of the 7 states that, Donald Trump is going to seize on, and he's going to say it's proof that he won the election and there was fraud.
Buckle up. This will be a bumpy ride as we head to the landing. Thank you both for being here this morning.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
John Fund is a columnist with the National Review. Craig Verroga is a Democratic strategist based in Washington, D.C. The current will be in a couple of those battleground states. We're heading to Arizona, and we're heading to Michigan as well. That's in the next couple of weeks. Stay tuned for that.